On the distant planet of Viridia, where alien civilizations were as advanced as they were mysterious, a special assignment had been handed down. Lyora, a highly trained Viridian assistant, was chosen for an unexpected mission: serve as a personal aide to Captain Nix Marlowe, the human leader of the SS Valiant. Lyora's planet was known for its technological marvels and logical thinking, and Viridians weren't exactly known for emotional connection. Lyora's role was clear: help the captain with her duties, maintain order, and ensure everything ran smoothly on the ship. But one thing she hadn't prepared for was the strange, warm human nature she was about to encounter. As Lyora stood at the entrance of the ship's main control room, her mind buzzed with the mission briefing. She was here to assist Captain Marlowe, a fierce, battle-worn leader whose reputation preceded her. Lyora had heard tales of the captain's strength and wit, but little did she know that the greatest challenge would not be the captain's command of space warfare, but the complexities of human emotion. Captain Marlowe was in the middle of an important strategy meeting when Lyora entered the room. The captain, her eyes sharp and focused on the holographic display, barely acknowledged her presence. Yet Lyora couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in the captain's shoulders. Marlowe had the weight of countless battles resting on her, and though she held the position of strength, there was an undeniable vulnerability beneath her tough exterior. Lyora's task was clear: she would assist wherever necessary and learn more about the human captain. At first, their interactions were simple, almost mechanical. Lyora would bring coffee, organize reports, and ensure Marlowe's quarters were in order. It wasn't much, but it was the only form of communication they had. However, the longer Lyora observed, the more she began to notice strange behaviors in the captain. Marlowe would often pause mid-task, her gaze lingering on distant stars through the window, as if searching for something, or perhaps someone, she'd lost. There was a quiet sorrow behind her eyes, one that Lyora couldn't fully understand. One evening, after a grueling day of strategy meetings and tense diplomatic negotiations, Lyora made her way to the captain's quarters to deliver some fresh data. She hesitated at the door for a moment, sensing the exhaustion in the air. When Marlowe looked up from her desk, her usual stoic expression softened for a brief moment. Lyora could feel the human warmth in the room, something she hadn't expected in her mission. She wasn't prepared for it, and neither was the captain, who had long buried such connections deep within herself. As Lyora handed over the report, Captain Marlowe unexpectedly placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of thanks, and in that moment, Lyora felt something stir deep within her, something unexplainable. She had always been trained to understand logic, order, and efficiency, but what was this feeling? What was this warmth that surged through her with just a simple touch? Little did Lyora know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would shatter everything she thought she knew about humans, and about herself. And Captain Marlowe, for all her hardened exterior, would soon find herself facing emotions she had long since buried. As the days passed aboard the SS Valiant, Lyora found herself growing more and more fascinated by Captain Nix Marlowe. The more time she spent with the captain, the more she began to realize that human emotions weren't as simple as she had assumed. At first, their interactions were limited to professional exchanges. Lyora would deliver reports, clean the captain's quarters, and ensure that everything was in order. But despite the rigid boundaries set by her Viridian training, Lyora couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in Marlowe's behavior. Captain Marlowe, despite her reputation as a fierce and unyielding leader, had moments of quiet solitude. Late at night, Lyora would sometimes find the captain staring out into the vast emptiness of space, lost in thought. There was a sadness in her eyes, one that was impossible to ignore. Lyora couldn't understand it. She had been programmed to recognize patterns, to make sense of situations, but the emotional complexities of humans were beyond her grasp. Why did Captain Marlowe look so distant at times? And why did she often seem to carry such a heavy burden? One evening, after a particularly grueling diplomatic meeting with an alien species, Lyora was called into Marlowe's quarters to assist with a report. The captain was unusually quiet, her back turned as she studied the data, her brows furrowed in concentration. Lyora hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. As she approached, the captain didn't acknowledge her immediately. For a split second, Lyora considered leaving the room to give Marlowe space, but something urged her to stay. She wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps it was a curiosity about the captain's mood or a deeper, more unfamiliar pull, but Lyora found herself standing there, unsure of what to do next. Lyora, Marlowe's voice cut through the silence, pulling the assistant from her thoughts. I need a moment. The captain's voice, usually strong and commanding, held a softness Lyora hadn't heard before. It was almost as if she were asking for something more than just assistance. Of course, Captain, Lyora replied, her tone cautious but understanding. She could feel the shift in the air, the subtle tension between them, but she didn't know what to make of it. Her logical mind told her that it was nothing more than the captain's need for a break, a brief moment of rest after a long day. But deep down, Lyora felt a strange ache in her chest, something she couldn't explain. The captain's silence stretched on, and Lyora found herself compelled to stay by her side, despite the absence of any direct request. And then, as if on instinct, Marlowe spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I've seen so much destruction, so much loss. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Lyora stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. She had read about human emotions, but she had never experienced them firsthand. Still, something inside her stirred, an unfamiliar sense of empathy. For the first time, Lyora wondered if there was more to this mission than just assisting the captain. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more human about her than she realized. But what was it? And what did it mean for her and Marlowe? Lyora couldn't answer that question yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She had crossed a line, and from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Lyora's mind was restless, tangled in a web of confusion and curiosity. The captain's words from the night before echoed in her thoughts, and for the first time since she'd arrived aboard the SS Valiant, she wasn't sure what to make of her mission. Lyora had been trained to serve, to help, and to carry out her duties with precision and efficiency. But this was different. Human emotions were a riddle, and no amount of data or analysis could explain the stirrings inside her. The next day, Lyora found herself drifting between her tasks, distracted by the weight of her thoughts. Captain Marlowe seemed distant, buried in her work as usual, but there was something in her gaze, something in the way she carried herself, that made Lyora's chest tighten. She noticed the way Marlowe paused occasionally, her eyes briefly softening, as if remembering something lost. It was a vulnerability that Lyora hadn't expected. She had thought humans were entirely ruled by logic and reason, just like her people. But now she realized that there was something deeply emotional at the core of every action, every word, and every gesture. Lyora had been given access to the ship's systems, and with little else to occupy her time, she decided to investigate human behavior further. She spent hours reading about human emotions, relationships, and the strange phenomenon of intimacy. She read about how humans could connect without words, how a simple touch could convey feelings stronger than anything a person could say. But the more she read, the more questions emerged. What did it mean when Marlowe's hand brushed against hers? Why had the captain's voice trembled when she spoke about her past? And why, when Lyora was around Marlowe, did her heart beat faster, her thoughts scatter? One evening, after a particularly difficult day of organizing ship-wide communication, Lyora found herself again in the captain's quarters. She had been summoned to assist, but when she entered, Marlowe was sitting at her desk, staring at the holographic screen in front of her. The captain's expression was unreadable, her lips pressed into a thin line. Without thinking, Lyora stepped closer, offering the data pad she had brought in silence. Marlowe didn't immediately take the pad, her gaze still fixed on the screen. "You've been reading a lot, haven't you?" she asked, her voice light, though there was a hint of something else behind her words. Lyora hesitated, unsure of what the captain meant. Was she referring to the research Lyora had done on human emotions, or was there something else in the captain's tone that Lyora couldn't place? "I've been learning about humans," Lyora admitted, her voice softer than usual. She wasn't sure why she had said it, but it felt right. Marlowe turned slowly, meeting Lyora's gaze for the first time that day. For a moment, the room felt charged with something unspoken. "And what have you learned?" the captain asked, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. Lyora found herself stammering, words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Humans, we connect in ways that I don't understand. It's not just about tasks or duty. It's more, something deeper." Marlowe studied her, and for the first time, Lyora saw a flicker of understanding pass through the captain's eyes. "You're right," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Humans don't just connect through words or actions. Sometimes it's in the moments we don't plan. The touches, the silence, the shared glances." Lyora's heart raced as she processed Marlowe's words. She realized that the captain wasn't just talking about their interactions. She was talking about something much bigger. And in that moment, Lyora understood. The mission wasn't just about assisting Marlowe. It was about discovering the complexities of human connection. And maybe, just maybe, it was about discovering a connection that neither of them had expected. The tension between Lyora and Captain Nix Marlowe grew palpable with each passing day. Lyora had spent weeks absorbing data on human emotions, but nothing had prepared her for the complex connection she was beginning to feel toward the captain. It was as if a storm was brewing inside her, confusing, intense, and powerful. She found herself thinking about Marlowe even when she wasn't around. Every word, every glance, every moment they shared seemed to be charged with something she couldn't define. One fateful day, the SS Valiant encountered a sudden and dangerous alien threat. The crew scrambled into action, navigating the ship through the chaos of laser fire and exploding debris. Lyora, who had never been in combat situations before, had always assumed her role was one of observation and support. But as the danger escalated, she found herself at the heart of it all. Her programming, which was meant to be logical and precise, suddenly became a blur of instinct. Without thinking, Lyora sprinted toward the captain's quarters. As she entered, she saw Marlowe standing at the console, her face grim but resolute. The ship was under attack, and the captain was determined to protect her crew no matter the cost. "Captain," Lyora shouted above the commotion, "we need to get to the escape pods now." But before she could finish her sentence, a massive explosion rocked the ship, sending both Lyora and Marlowe tumbling to the floor. Lyora's body instinctively shielded the captain, her viridian strength allowing her to absorb the impact. The world around them seemed to slow down as Lyora helped Marlowe to her feet. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, an unspoken understanding passing between them. In that instant, Lyora realized how much she had come to care for the captain. It wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about protecting the person who had slowly become so important to her. "Lyora, we need to move," Marlowe said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. But Lyora couldn't shake the overwhelming urge to stay close to the captain, to ensure her safety at all costs. It was then that Lyora acted on instinct again, her hand reaching out to grasp Marlowe's arm. The touch sent an electric jolt through both of them, a surge of something far more powerful than mere physical contact. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, surrounded by the madness of battle, their hands still touching. It was as if the entire universe had faded into the background, leaving only the two of them in that charged space. "Are you okay?" Marlowe asked, her voice softer now, more vulnerable. Lyora's heart raced at the captain's concern. This wasn't just a command anymore. It was care. It was genuine concern. Lyora felt something shift inside her, a realization that she hadn't yet fully acknowledged. "I'm fine, Captain," Lyora replied, though the truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. Together, they ran toward the escape pods, but something had changed. Lyora couldn't explain it, But she felt different. She had always followed orders, had always focused on logic and precision. But now, in the midst of chaos and danger, she had experienced something deeper. Her feelings for Captain Marlowe were no longer just curiosity. They were something far more complex, something that felt almost human. As they escaped the ship and found safety, Leora's mind continued to race. What had just happened? What did it all mean? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? In the aftermath of the battle, the SS Valiant lay in ruins. The ship had sustained serious damage, and the crew was working tirelessly to repair what they could. But as the days passed, Leora found herself unable to focus on her usual duties. The escape from the alien attack had left her shaken, and the strange feelings she had been experiencing toward Captain Nix Marlowe were now impossible to ignore. Every time they were near each other, there was an unspoken connection, a pull that Leora couldn't explain. It wasn't just the physical closeness, it was something deeper. Marlowe, ever the professional, seemed to be unaffected by the chaos. She threw herself into managing the repairs and leading the crew, as though she had done this 1,000 times before. But Leora couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of exhaustion in her eyes. The captain had always been the rock of the crew, the one who held everything together. Yet, in the quiet moments when no one else was around, there was a flicker of something else, something fragile, something that reminded Leora of the vulnerability she had seen in Marlowe's eyes before. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Leora found herself standing outside the captain's quarters. She had been summoned to deliver an update on the ship's status, but her mind was racing with questions that she had never thought to ask before. What was this connection between them? Was it something Marlowe felt as well? Or was she just a bystander in this complex human world of emotions? The door slid open, and Marlowe looked up, her expression softening when she saw Leora standing there. "Come in," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Leora hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But she knew she couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. Not anymore. As Leora entered the room, she felt the air between them thicken with unspoken tension. She sat down across from the captain, her hands resting in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was almost deafening. Finally, it was Marlowe who broke the quiet. "You've been distant lately, Leora," she said softly. "Is something bothering you?" Leora felt her heart skip a beat. The captain's voice held an edge of concern, and it sent a wave of warmth through Leora's chest. She had never heard Marlowe speak to her like this, so gentle, so open. For a moment, Leora considered saying nothing, pretending that everything was fine. But something inside her urged her to be honest, to let the walls she had built around herself fall away. I'm not sure what's happening, Captain," Leora admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About you. About us. And I don't know how to make sense of it." Marlowe's eyes softened, and for the first time, Leora saw a flicker of understanding pass between them. "Leora," Marlowe said, her voice low and steady, "you're not the only one who's confused, but I need you to know something. You're more than just an assistant to me. You're important." Leora's heart pounded in her chest. The captain's words were like a spark, igniting something deep inside her. But what did it mean? What was this connection between them? And where would it lead? For the first time, Leora realized that her mission had changed. It was no longer about serving Captain Marlowe. It was about understanding what this bond was, and what it could become. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore the feelings that were growing inside her. And neither could Marlowe. The days following their quiet conversation were a blur of emotions for Leora. She couldn't shake the weight of Captain Nix Marlowe's words from her mind. The way the captain had looked at her, with such honesty and vulnerability, had pierced through the walls Leora had built around herself. Leora had always been focused on logic, duty, and precision, traits that were highly valued in Viridian culture. But what she felt now was something different. something wild and untamable. Marlowe seemed to sense the shift in the air as well. She continued to lead the crew with the same determination as always, but there was a subtle change in the way she interacted with Leora. They spoke more openly now, no longer confined to just tasks and reports. During long shifts in the control room, their conversations would drift to more personal topics. Leora found herself learning about the captain's past, about the battles she had fought, the losses she had suffered, and the dreams she still held close to her heart. Marlowe's guarded nature seemed to soften, and with each word, Leora felt herself drawn closer to her. One evening, after a particularly taxing day of repairs and strategy sessions, Marlowe invited Leora to join her for a rare break. The captain had always been the one to keep to herself during downtime, but tonight, she seemed to crave company. "You've been working nonstop, Leora," Marlowe had said, her voice warm. "Why don't you take a break? We can talk for a while." Leora had hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But she knew she couldn't keep avoiding the emotions that had taken root within her. She agreed, and soon found herself sitting across from Marlowe in the captain's private quarters, a soft light illuminating the room. The ship hummed quietly around them, but for once, Leora didn't feel the weight of her duties pressing down on her. It was just the two of them, sharing a quiet moment. Marlowe leaned back in her chair, her eyes studying Leora with a mixture of curiosity and understanding. "So tell me," she began, her voice playful yet sincere, "what's it like being from Viridia? What do you think about humans?" Leora smiled softly, surprised by the captain's question. It was the first time Marlowe had asked her to open up. "It's different," Leora admitted, her tone thoughtful. "I've always been taught to observe, to study. We value logic, control. But humans, you're so unpredictable. Your emotions, the way you form connections, it's like nothing I've ever seen." Marlowe chuckled, leaning forward slightly. "We're messy, aren't we?" Leora laughed softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes, you are. But I think that's what makes you so fascinating." The air between them shifted again, and this time, Leora felt the pull even more strongly. The captain's presence was magnetic, her every word and movement drawing Leora in. For a brief moment, they sat in silence, both of them lost in thought, as if the world outside didn't exist. Finally, it was Marlowe who broke the quiet. "Leora," she said softly, her gaze steady, "I need to know, are you feeling what I'm feeling?" Leora's heart raced at the question. She had been avoiding it for so long, afraid of what it might mean. But now, with the captain looking at her with such intensity, she couldn't deny it any longer. "Yes," Leora whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm feeling it too." In that moment, something shifted, an unspoken promise between them, one that neither of them could ignore any longer. They were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were connected in a way that neither had expected, and neither could deny. The days that followed felt like a new chapter, a different reality from the one Leora had known before. Every interaction with Captain Nix Marlowe was charged with something she hadn't quite figured out yet, something that made her feel both nervous and exhilarated at the same time. It was as if they were both walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of something they couldn't control. The connection between them was undeniable, but neither of them had yet spoken about what it really meant. Leora was finding it harder to concentrate on her duties. Every time she saw Marlowe, every time their paths crossed, a spark would ignite within her. It was distracting. She knew that Marlowe had her own set of emotions to deal with, her own responsibilities, and yet there was something in the way the captain looked at her now that suggested she wasn't unaffected by the bond that had begun to form between them. There were moments when their gazes lingered just a bit too long, when their hands brushed ever so slightly. It was a touch that felt innocent, yet carried the weight of something deeper. One evening, when the ship was in relative peace after the chaos of the earlier weeks, Leora found herself in the control room with Marlowe, monitoring the ship's course and ensuring the systems were running smoothly. There was something calming about the way they worked together, side by side. Marlowe, focused and determined, gave orders with confidence, and Lyora, always precise, carried them out without question. But even in this routine moment, Lyora could feel the tension between them, a silent current running just below the surface. After a while, Marlowe glanced over at her, her expression softer than usual. "Lyora," she said quietly, her voice almost tender. "I've been thinking about what you said, about us, and I need to know something." Lyora's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea where this conversation was going, but her instincts told her it was something important. "What do you need to know, Captain?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Marlowe hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching Lyora's face. Is this just a passing thing for you? Or is it something more?" Lyora's mind raced. She had thought about this moment often, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure what to say. She had never imagined her mission would turn into something so personal. But looking into Marlowe's eyes, seeing the uncertainty there, Lyora realized that this wasn't something she could ignore. "It's not just passing, Captain," she said softly. "It's more than that. It's something I can't explain, but I know it's real." Marlowe took a deep breath, and for a moment, the room was filled with a quiet tension. Then, slowly, she reached out, placing a hand on Lyora's. The contact was gentle, but the sensation sent a shiver through Lyora's body. She had never been touched like this before, not in this way. It was comforting, yet it stirred something within her she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge. "I'm glad you feel that way," Marlowe said, her voice low. "Because I do too. I don't know where this is going, but I want to find out. Together." Lyora looked at her, feeling her heart race as the captain's words sank in. There was no going back now. They had both crossed a line, and there was no turning back from the path they had set upon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Lyora wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, she knew she would face it by Marlowe's side. Together. As the days passed, Lyora and Captain Nix Marlowe found themselves navigating uncharted waters, not just in space, but in their growing relationship. The connection they shared was no longer just a whisper in the back of their minds. It was something they had both acknowledged, something they couldn't ignore. But as much as their bond deepened, the challenges of their respective roles weighed heavily on both of them. Lyora had always been an assistant, a logical being, dedicated to her mission. Marlowe, on the other hand, was the captain, carrying the weight of her crew's safety on her shoulders. Their worlds were different, and yet, somehow, they had come to intertwine in ways neither could explain. One evening, as the SS Valiant cruised through the silent depths of space, Lyora found herself standing on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. The vastness of the universe always made her feel small, insignificant, yet now, with Marlowe beside her, it felt like everything had more meaning. The captain had joined her, silently standing by her side. Neither of them spoke at first, but the weight of their shared experience seemed to fill the space between them. Marlowe was the first to break the silence. "Lyora," she said, her voice softer than usual, "do you ever wonder about the future? About what's next for us?" Lyora turned to look at her, surprised by the question. The future had always seemed so uncertain, so distant. She had always focused on the present moment, on fulfilling her duties. But now, with Marlowe standing there, her gaze steady and searching, Lyora realized that the future wasn't something to fear. "I suppose I never really thought about it," Lyora admitted, her voice thoughtful. "I've always been focused on the mission, on my role. But now I wonder too, what if the mission isn't everything?" Marlowe stepped closer, her presence comforting yet intense. "I think we both know the mission isn't everything anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something more here, something that goes beyond duty, but I don't know what to do with it." Lyora felt her heart race at the words. She had felt the same pull, the same magnetic force drawing them together, but the uncertainty still lingered. How could they move forward when their roles were so different? Could they truly be something more, despite the boundaries that separated them? I don't know either, Captain, Leora said softly, meeting Marlowe's gaze. But I don't want to stop exploring this, whatever it is, with you. Marlowe's lips curved into a small, almost relieved smile. She reached out, her hand brushing against Leora's. It was a simple gesture, but to Leora, it felt like a promise. They didn't need all the answers right now. They didn't need a roadmap. What they had was real, and for the first time in a long while, Leora didn't feel the need to have everything figured out. I'm glad you feel that way, Marlowe said, her voice full of quiet certainty. Because, Leora, I think we're on the brink of something incredible. Together. The stars outside shimmered, a silent witness to the unspoken understanding between them. Whatever the future held, Leora and Marlowe knew one thing for sure. They were no longer just captain and assistant. They were something more, something that was still unfolding, and whatever path lay ahead, they would face it side by side. Together, they were ready to explore the unknown, not just in the vastness of space, but in each other. As the SS Valiant continued its journey through the stars, Leora and Captain Nix Marlowe found themselves closer than ever before. The initial uncertainty that had once lingered between them had faded, replaced by something deeper, something undeniable. The crew could sense the change too, though it wasn't openly discussed. There was a quiet understanding that something significant had shifted aboard the ship, a subtle yet powerful bond between their captain and the mysterious assistant from Viridia. Leora had never expected to feel this way. For so long, she had focused on logic, duty, and following the path laid out for her. But Marlowe had shown her that there was more to life than duty. There was connection, emotion, and trust. Marlowe had become more than just a captain to her. She was her partner, her equal in this vast, unpredictable universe. Leora no longer felt like an outsider. She felt like she belonged, like she had a purpose beyond her original mission. And it was all because of the captain. The bond they shared had blossomed in ways neither had predicted, and it wasn't just about emotions anymore. It was about partnership, support, and understanding. They had come to rely on one another in ways they hadn't anticipated. Whether it was during tense moments when the ship was under threat, or in quiet moments between missions, they were there for each other, as much as they were there for the rest of the crew. One evening, as the stars twinkled brightly outside the observation deck, Leora stood side by side with Marlowe, looking out at the vastness of space. The universe stretched endlessly before them, full of mysteries and adventures waiting to be discovered. And for the first time, Leora didn't feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Instead, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Marlowe turned to Leora, a soft smile playing on her lips. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said quietly. "From those first moments when we didn't know what to make of each other." Leora smiled in return, her heart swelling with affection. "We have," she agreed. "And I'm glad for it. I never imagined that being here with you, like this, would feel so right." Marlowe's eyes softened, and she placed a hand gently on Leora's. "You've changed me, Leora, in ways I didn't even think were possible. I never thought I'd find someone like you, someone who understands me." Leora's heart skipped a beat at the words. She had never expected to hear such things from the captain, but somehow they felt like the most natural thing in the world. The connection between them had only grown stronger, and now it was something neither of them could deny. They had built something beautiful together, something real. "We've built something worth protecting," Leora said, her voice filled with sincerity. "Together, we can face whatever the universe throws at us." Marlowe nodded, her gaze steady and filled with determination. "Together," she repeated, her voice full of conviction. And in that moment, Leora realized that they had come full circle. They had started as strangers, unsure of the path before them. But now, they were more than just captain and assistant. They were a team. united, strong, and ready for whatever the future held. The universe was still vast and unknown, but with Marlowe by her side, Leora knew she could face anything. Whatever adventures lay ahead, they would face them together. The SS Valiant drifted silently through the void of space, its crew now working in perfect harmony, their unity a reflection of the bond between Captain Nix Marlowe and Leora. The days of uncertainty and tension had long passed, replaced by a quiet strength. Each mission, each new discovery, seemed to bring them closer, not just as allies in space, but as partners, in ways neither could have imagined at the beginning of their journey. Their relationship had transformed from one of duty to something far more profound. The intimacy that had once been tentative and uncertain had blossomed into an undeniable connection, rooted in trust and mutual respect. Leora had never imagined that her role as an assistant would evolve into something so personal, so integral to her very existence. She had come to realize that, while she had been focused on her responsibilities, Marlowe had been the key to unlocking a side of herself she didn't even know existed. Marlowe, too, had found herself in uncharted territory. The captain had always kept her distance, always held herself separate from the crew, but Leora had made her question those boundaries. Slowly, she had allowed herself to open up, to trust someone more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. What they had wasn't just the typical captain-crew dynamic. It was something more, something that made them both vulnerable and stronger at the same time. They didn't need words to understand each other anymore. A glance, a touch, was enough to convey what they needed to say. One quiet evening, as the stars streaked past the windows of the observation deck, Marlowe and Leora found themselves standing together, looking out at the ever-expanding universe. They had become so attuned to each other that even in silence, they were in sync. The weight of their journey had been heavy at times, but now, with each passing day, they had learned how to navigate not just the vastness of space, but the complexities of their emotions and the deep connection they shared. "I think we're ready," Marlowe said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a spark of something deeper in her eyes. "Ready for what?" Leora asked, her curiosity piqued. "To take the next step," Marlowe replied, turning to face her. "We've faced so much together, and I think it's time we stop questioning what we are. We've built something worth fighting for, something stronger than the stars around us." Leora's heart raced at the captain's words, a mixture of excitement and trepidation flooding her chest. She had never imagined that the captain, the one who had always been so composed, would express such a sentiment. But as she looked into Marlowe's eyes, she realized that everything had changed. The future no longer seemed daunting or uncertain. With Marlowe beside her, Leora felt that anything was possible. "I agree," Leora whispered, her voice full of conviction. "Together, we can face anything." Marlowe smiled, a rare softness in her expression. "Together," she echoed, as though the word itself held all the answers. And as they stood there, in the quiet of the vast expanse, Leora and Marlowe knew that no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them as one. Whatever the future held, be it the mysteries of the galaxy or the journey of their shared hearts, they were ready. Together, always.